Greetings. My name is Easten Law, and I serve as the Associate Director of the Overseas Ministries Study Center. Welcome to another episode of the OMSC Roundtable, where we gather with scholars of world Christianity and mission studies to hear a little bit about their stories, to talk about the state of the field, and on all of the insights that have been gathered throughout this scholarly endeavor. And today I am truly honored to be able to sit down with none other than Dr. Klaus Koschorke, who's been a pillar in world Christianity studies as of late. Recently honored here at the Princeton Seminary World Christianity Conference, and has just laid amazing foundations at the University of Munich for the study of the polycentric nature of the world church today. So thank you so much for joining us.
Glad to be here. Thanks a lot.
Yeah, like we talked about earlier, the OMSC Roundtable is really a way for people to put a face and put a story behind the scholarship. And your scholarship is so prolific. And to start things off, I would love to hear a little bit about how you started in this particular field of study. What got you interested in the world church, and where did you do your studies initially?
Well, what's remarkable that I didn't dream of ending there where I'm now. And this, I had different plans. I studied at various universities in Germany and UK. I studied in Berlin, in Heidelberg, then in Edinburgh, then Tübingen, then going back to Heidelberg. And in my beginning, I was a patristic scholar, and my dissertation had been in the field of the recently discovered Coptic Gnostic text for Nag Hammadi, where I had the privilege to work on two documents which had not been published so far. And later, in the German academic context, we need a second doctorate habilitation.
Yes.
And this
Too
was
much work.
Another field of early patristic studies, Greek ecclesiology of the 4th century, connected with Basil of Caesarea. And all this was done, and but I always had an interest in the wider global church, and that's why in 1982-83 I decided to spend 1 year outside Europe in Sri Lanka. And we went there as a family with my wife and the 3 children we had. And this was a great experience for all of us, for us as family, for me as person, but also in my academic orientation. And it was there that I was exposed to the realities of Asian Christianity and the richness and the challenges. And this really changed my life. And since then, I've tried to develop a new approach to integrate what I've learned into a wider map of the global history of Christianity. And then I concluded my habilitation thesis in patristic studies. But when in 1993 I was appointed professor at the University of Munich, I changed there the character of my chair for church history and made it a center for the study of early and global Christianity. And some colleagues were a little surprised, but this was a very challenging work.
Wow. Well, it seems like that, it's amazing to hear about that transition from patristics into this bigger view of the church, and then bringing that back to you brought that back into your study of history, right?
Yes.
And laid a foundation for all of us through that process. So thank you so much. How did once you changed that chair and started on this project at the University of Munich, can you share a little bit about the kind of courses you taught, the kind of early research you did to try and build this foundation for the study of church history from a global perspective once you were established?
Yes, well, on the one hand, that's important for me. It didn't change that much because as a professor of church history in Munich, I had to teach courses covering 2,000 years of history of Christianity.
Yes.
And I followed the traditional pattern of 4 or 5 epochs, but what I changed was the geography, the maps.
Yes.
So my students learned everything they had to learn, know about the German, the European context, but I always asked what happened at the same time in other regions of the world, and what happened at the same time in Latin America or Asia or Africa. And by this very fact, you will get a very different approach. But that has been very important for me, also talking to my colleagues, because, I mean, in the German context, on the one hand, the colleagues were quite interested. On the other hand, they did not know exactly how to do. Because you see, as a church historian, you have to master the language of your sources, but world Christianity, there are 20, 50, 100 languages.
Yes,
how to
many.
deal with this? They all were aware that even in the field of history of Christianity, the world is bigger than Europe, but how to handle this, and that's why I try to show them. And by the way, that's the approach also in my most recent publications, like the new textbook, which now has been released in English as well,
Yes.
about which we will talk possibly a little later.
Yes.
To show it's not such a complicated thing. Just to go one classical period in at Protestant theological faculties, the Reformation period. If you take 3 of the names, if each of the students in my in church history should know, I take only the Emperor Charles V, or Cajetan, or the Pope Leo X. They are closely connected with the history of the Reformation. At the same time, they play a very important role in other regions as well. Take Charles V. He was the emperor against whom Luther had stood at the Diet at Worms, and he was the real opponent to the Reformation movement. At the same time, he was the overlord of the Spanish expansion overseas, and he governed in the end an empire where the, quote, the sun never sank.
Right.
In Asia, Africa, and what turned out to be America. Or if you take Cajetan, who has been the cardinal who questioned Luther in 1518 and asked him to give up his ideas. He was at the same time the superior to Bartolomé de las Casas, the first critic of Spanish colonialism in the New World and not simply being superior, he even supported him. Or to take a third name, Leo the Pope, Leo X. He was the person to whom Luther addressed his writing on the freedom of a Christian, and who later declared Luther to be a heretic. And at the same time, in Africa already, we have a Christian kingdom, the Congo Kingdom, which was a very remarkable product of a self-Christianization. Already in 1491, we do have there a baptized monarch. 1491, 1 year before Columbus discovered America, and he himself, on his own initiative, tried very much to make the Congo region a Christian region, and we have a very extended correspondence with between this King Afonso, with his Portuguese colleague, and with the Curia in Rome, and it's accessible. It's well edited for years. Recently, a new edition has been made by John Thornton, and only very few people know about this. Historians in the field. But so, on the one hand, Pope Leo X against Luther. On the other hand, in connection with black Christian monarch in Africa. And by the way, it was his son, King Afonso's son, Enrique, who was to become the first and for centuries the only black bishop in sub-Saharan Africa. And so if you simply take these three names, it's quite somehow easy to extend what I call the global map, the history of the global map of Christianity. And the decisive point always is not to give up, and that's what I tell to my colleagues always. You must not forget what you have learned. You must be able to place your history or our history, let's say in Europe, on a much wider map of global Christian presence, and then to interconnect. And so first thing is continue to do what you have learned, but then be aware of the much wider map, and then learn about what happened in other world regions. And this then became the center of my research in Munich, to engage in studies on Christianity in Asia, and Africa, and Latin America. And there were a great number of projects and international and interdisciplinary conferences, the Munich-Freising conference, and I've been very honored that important people from here, like Afra Adugama, belong to the most senior and most reliable attendants of these Munich-Freising conferences, and he told me that this also influenced the way he started teaching world Christianity here.
Absolutely. And I love the example you gave that really gives me a sense of how you built your theory and your approach also out of your teaching, right? You still have to teach, the classic timeline of church history, but then, like you said, you widen the map, you take new pieces, and even taking three very European sort of Christian leaders, you can map that very quickly into Africa, and then begin mapping that out into parts of Asia, and it really gives, I think, scholars permission to be experts at one thing, and yet be always challenged to be aware of something more and those connections. And I think that's a great inheritance you've given us. Can you tell me a little bit more about these conferences that you just mentioned? That many of the prominent scholars today have been shaped by, including Professor Arogame here at Princeton. What was your idea behind starting these conferences? What were you hoping that they would achieve? And who were some of the people that you remember being, in addition to Dr. Arogame, being very present in those conversations?
Yes, he mentioned himself that it was at the first, it was in reality the second of these conferences that he met some of the great pillars of world Christianity, like Andrew Walls, like Okbukalo, like Adrian Hastings, and many other names. And the basic idea had been simply starting from this image of extended, of wide maps of global Christian presence, simply to ask what happened at a given time at different places. And that's the idea was to invite, to collect specialists from various fields and make them start a conversation among themselves. And this was mentioned yesterday by one of the speakers at the session in honor of me. I did it at a specific place, Munich-Freising.
Yes.
Freising is an ancient city, and it had three advantages. First of all, it was near to Munich airport, so people easily could get there. Secondly, it's a very ancient, it's a medieval city, so it fits into the imagination many American or other people have from Germany. But third, the most important thing was there they were locked up.
Nowhere to go.
They could not go anywhere else, because if I had this conference made in Munich,
in downtown.
and then you see with such many cultural programs and so on, in the evening all of them they're gone. They could not leave. I mean, they could have left, but they didn't know how to. So what was for me the most important thing in the evening, sitting together, share a beer or wine and talking, and then this conversation starts. What you are working on, and what you're interested in, this and this I have similar observations in my field. How do they fit together? And that's a real productive process.
Yes.
And it's very often, another image I like to use is it's the challenge, the importance of the concept of world Christianity to connect isolated islands of knowledge. Because it's very often that you have specialists in one field.
Yes.
Who know little about other fields. And the one example I mentioned at the conference was this of Ethiopia and Ethiopianism. Ethiopia, that's the classical, the traditional, the ancient African form of Christianity with specific languages and so on, specific forms and so on. It's studied very well, especially, for example, in the German academic context, and with biblical studies, with biblical translation and so on. But these colleagues who know really each version of the Gas Bible, they never had heard about Ethiopianism.
Yeah.
Ethiopianism, again, is a modern movement of emancipation among black Christians on both sides of the Atlantic.
Right.
And it had such an enormous impact in various fields, in the transatlantic, in the shaping of a Christian Black Atlantic as a space of communication and interchange between Christians on both sides of and all of these political and other movements.
Yes.
So, but simply you cannot split them, have this one part here and there, they have to see together. Or to give another example, which is really exciting, African independent churches.
Right.
African independent churches, they arose about the turn from 19th to 20th century. And they rose independently in different places, in South Africa, in West Africa, in East Africa, and so on, because they responded to the same structure. This was the clash between the rising wave of European paternalism, and partly even racism, and now the emancipation movements among educated African elites, Christian elites, because the missionary movement there started with a promise. The promise, okay, now there are cultural differences, but once you adopt Christianity, you will rise on the ladder of civilization. One of the issues used. And the end of missionary work will be the establishment of self-governing, self-supporting, self-extending churches.
Right.
But now they had studied, they were full informed, but now they were refused, said not yet, the time's not yet ripe, maybe in 10, 20 or 30 years. And that was why, independently of each other, in the black churches under African leadership arose. Now, this now is well studied, and so many books have been written.
Yeah.
But we have exactly the same constellation in Asia, and that's no field of research, and simply to look with African eyes to Asia and vice versa.
Right.
This already is a huge moment of progress. And then again, if you see if this has a deeply influence on events like the World Missionary Conference, Edinburgh 1910, which responded to this rising nationalism, and tried to and gave it back. And that's one of the reasons why then the ecumenical movement in Asia proceeded much quicker than in the West, for example. It's a ping-pong structure, but simply you become aware of it simply by asking people, friends, colleagues, sitting together and compare what happened at a given time in different parts of the world.
Yeah, and so these conferences really provided a platform for people, for scholars not to be siloed, right? To really be able to not just present research to one another, but, as you said, be locked up in the evenings together over a beer or a glass of wine, and suddenly the connections start to happen, right? And that is, I think that model continues with every World Christianity conference that is developed, whether it's at Yale, Edinburgh, whether it's at Princeton. It's getting these different perspectives together, and to learn from one another to fill in these gaps.
I mean, the Munich, they were a little different from the Yale, Edinburgh, and the
Princeton gathering.
World Christianity gatherings by. We had a limited number of participants.
It's a little more focused, yeah.
And we had a very clear idea when inviting them what they could.
It was very intentional.
What they could. Questions were asked to them.
I see.
And they were from the very beginning conceived as a part of a publication project.
Right.
And I've been very proud to be able. Now there have been 8 Munich-Freising conferences.
That's fantastic.
Each of these conference proceedings was published 1 year after.
That's very fast too. Yeah.
And
Great.
sometimes I had to convince people.
Yes, that's part of the work, right? I understand. But speaking of publications, you have such a huge body of work. We couldn't possibly go over all of it. So I want to ask a fairly simple question in terms of your writing. What's a text that you've written that you still believe is perhaps one of the, in your own eyes, the most foundational, most important for your broader view of the field? What's something that you've written that you keep going back to and reflecting on,
I think that's it's interesting. You have some ideas in mind, but it's only at a given point that you coin them.
Yeah.
And that's the concept of polycentricity. And I have to admit, from the very beginning, if I look at my very earliest writings in this field, they always were structured according to this concept of polycentricity, but it was then one big conference, the sixth Munich-Freising conference on the concept of polycentricity, which I think then made the widest impact. And because that's more the consensus, and it has various aspects. It means that Christianity had, not only in the most recent 100 years, but from its very beginning, it was a polycentric movement with a variety of actors, with a variety of regional centers of expansions, with both missionary activities and local initiatives with the different forms of local appropriation of the gospel.
Right.
And one specific aspect on the one hand is that, on the one hand, I think knowledge of the missionary movement is important, the Western missionary movement. On the other hand, we always have to be clear that the Western missionary movement was just one factor among others. And it were the local people in the end who decided about reception, or rejection, or partial selection, or whatsoever, and who spread the gospel or who didn't spread the gospel. And the Western missionary movement, I mean, the first conference had the title Christian and Spices. And this was a famous quotation we know from contemporary source, that's what Vasco da Gama said when he entered. Vasco da Gama, the great Portuguese discoverer, who found that sea route to India, which Columbus on the other way had missed. And when in 1498 he for the first time entered Indian soil.
Yeah.
We have an eyewitness report that there he met two Arab merchants who greeted them in Castilian,
so there was
Genoese. What the devil are you looking for here? And then he gave the famous answer, Christian and spices. And spices, this was the economic motive of Portuguese overseas trade. And Christianity, this was the ideological one. And they had some vague ideas about some rich Christian emperor.
That's right.
They were looking, no, the point is, and it was more or less by chance that landed in South India, where, as a matter of fact, they encountered a very ancient Christian community living there for centuries. And the why I love this story and repeat it again and again is that it was not the European the European colonialists or the European missionaries who brought Christianity to Asia and Africa, they already encountered existing communities.
Yes.
So again here, Western mission is one factor among others. And this we always have to keep in mind.
Yeah, and this is just one example of many, I'm sure, that illustrate the polycentricity of the church, of Christian mission. And but tell me a little bit about your most recent work then. What's we had noted earlier that you recently had a book published, I think about a year ago in German, but now the English edition is out as well. Can you tell us a little bit more about this text and where you are now?
Last year, I've been able to publish 2 books, both of them in open access format. And the one is more which directly deals with the issue of polycentrism. It's called Early South Links in the History of World Christianity, and discussing them not in 19th or 20th century, where we have many examples of these regional, transcontinental entanglements, but already in the very early period, 16th and 17th century. And I think it has some quite remarkable examples. But more important for me was the English version of my German textbook. The title of the German textbook, of the English textbook, is A Short History of Christianity Beyond the West, Asia, Africa, and Latin America, 1450 to 2000. And, well, it's arranged in a chronological order and organized in such a way that on the one hand you can use it simply to teach history of Christianity in Africa, for example, or Asia.
You can use it on a number of...
Or you can, if you teach Reformation history in the way I mentioned, you can discuss the big events, Luther and Calvin and Council of Trent and so on. But at the same time, looking, for example, the Council of Trent, what impact it had on the development of Christianity overseas. There was a very direct context. For example, Latin America, in the first half of 16th century, there were many experiments. And we have, for example, in Mexico, a long list of translation of texts, Christian texts, in one of the various indigenous vernaculars, about 70. And then came Council of Trent, and you see in the Council of Trent, on the one hand, some reforms were organized. On the other hand, Protestantism shut off. And one of the main dangers of Protestantism was Bible translation in the vernaculars. So vernaculars were regarded as, quote, mother of all heresy. This had a deep impact on the development of this emerging Latin American Christianity in Mexico, or the same in India, where the former cooperation with the St. Thomas Christians was ended and so on. And you see, so it's a book, it's arranged, well, you can use it chronologically, or you can use it by epoch, or you could look only at one continent or region. And what's special about this book is that it's closely connected with another book that already had been published and available in English since 2007. The documentary source.
The documentary sources book,
And this can be used on the one hand if you're teaching history of Christianity, you can say you study chapter 7 and then take the documents number 23,
Yes,
27,
to
and
connect
so on.
them.
And this is intended to widen this new perspective.
Yes, in many ways, you've been such a prolific advocate for polycentricity and seeing the church in that way, and it's clear to me that through these two books, it becomes very easy to teach it that way as well, right? That you can use the book in multiple ways, you can reference them to primary documents, and it's really a great gift to church historians, church history teachers, I think, all over the world.
And there's one aspect for easy teaching. I mean, it was mentioned at the conference that I love to take pictures. And as a matter of principle, I've been to all regions, which I talked about and took many pictures.
Yeah.
And there is a digital appendix.
Okay.
With 250 pictures of mine.
Wow, what a gift.
Which can be easily accessed and used for academic teaching as well. And
the future is very visual. The young people need pictures. They can't just work with text. So you're already thinking so far ahead.
Two different, naturally I do have historic pictures as well. But in most of the places, well, it's an appendix, and it should be mentioned because sometimes people do not realize that it's connected.
That these resources are there,
and they are easily available. There's a QR code, and you tap on that, and then you can see pictures from China or Mexico or Uganda or South Africa or so on.
Yeah, we will make sure to highlight that as we share this conversation. But to close out our time, you've already established these firm foundations that many of us stand upon, whether we're teaching church history from a global perspective, whether we're thinking about our own focus area and how to connect that to others. What's your hope for the future of world Christianity studies? What do you see ahead, given the developments that are happening around us? I would love to learn a little bit more about your perspective about the future of this study.
Well, I think on the one hand, we are still at the very beginning. There much needs to be done. One aspect for me is, one of the questions asked is, how would you define world Christianity?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
I would define world Christianity as an ongoing conversation between Christians from different background, cultures, regions, contexts, and so on. Mm-hmm. And this applies to living people who, for example, I have met at this conference. Mm-hmm. And that's why I appreciate this, the World Christianity conferences organized by Princeton or Yale, Edinburgh so much. But now as a historian, it becomes a little more difficult. I cannot ask them in the coffee break or online, what do you think, or this or this. Now it comes to the question of sources.
Okay.
And that's why for me, the search for sources, giving us the view from the other side of history.
Yes.
So important. And in Munich, we had a research project, for example, on indigenous Christian journals from Asia and Africa around 1900. Looking into different regions, it was about Christian journals, but not mystery journals, but journals that had been published by local Christian elites.
Right.
And the astonishing thing is there are many more that you might expect, but you have to search for them and find them. And we discussed journals from South Africa, West Africa, India, and Philippines, but also invited scholars from other fields to contribute. And it's amazing what you find there. And for example, currently people talk so much about decolonializing theology
Yes.
and so on, which is something important on the one hand. On the other hand, it's a bit a pity because so much what's now discovered in you find already in those texts from 1900.
Yeah, people aren't always looking back.
Search for equality, protest against European paternalism, suprematism, the search, development of, for example, the quest. Why shouldn't there be, that's now a verbal quotation, why shouldn't there be an African Christianity such as there is also an European and Asian Christianity? All those questions are being discussed there, and a few people knows about it. For example, this is one of my current, I published in the context of this wider project, I published a monograph on that Indian journal. It's named The Christian Patriot, which in itself already was a program as an Indian Christian in times of rising Indian nationalism to be a patriot.
Yeah,
the name
already thinking through these questions.
Yes.
Yeah.
And it existed from 1890 to 1929. It had a wide circulation, first in India, then in South Asia, then in South Africa, in UK and US.
Really?
In South Africa, it was quoted by Gandhi. In US, John R. Mott belonged to its subscribers. And nobody knows about it.
Nobody knows about it. So.
And we got, I got, it was now 40 years ago, a microfilm from Yale, where I will travel next week again, and we digitized it in Munich. And my aim is now, after this monograph has been completed, to make this digitized text available to a wider public.
Yeah.
That's why we plan a digital edition, but there are many more such exciting documents from the other side of missionary history, and that's, I think, very important to enter into full conversation with Christians around places and times.
Yeah, I love the way that you frame that, because there's the practical present, which is world Christianity is a conversation amongst, Christians all over the world, but then you also give a very rich historian's perspective that conversation is also in the past. Yes. And we don't know about those, we don't have all sides of that conversation yet. The sources are still important. We should go back and recover, we should bring them in.
It's exciting. For example, this rock effect. I know many really highly respected colleagues. When I spoke about this Munich project, this indigenous Christian journalists, some of them, in spite of being really prestigious mission historians, didn't know about the exact.
We don't have all the stories.
They don't have all the stories. What do you mean? Do you mean journals? Journals that were established first by the missionaries and then later taken over by local Christians? Said no. There have been journals from the very beginning. They were planned and initiated as voice of the Indian Christians. They simply didn't know about it.
Yeah, so we still have so much to learn. I understand what you mean by, in some ways, we're still at the beginning, and thank you nevertheless for being such a, even if we are at the beginning, you've started us. You are one of the figures that have started this quest with such a strong push. You've given us all momentum to pursue this sort of project that you have already talked about. And so again, I could sit and learn. So I would love to sit and continue to learn from you, and I'm looking forward to future opportunities to do so. But thank you for sitting down with us, sharing some of your wisdom with me and with everyone watching. We do hope that this provides people, young scholars, senior scholars, people that are using your books, a chance to know a little bit more about how you've come to these important conclusions and how we can continue to move this project forward. So thank you so much, Dr. Koschorke.
It was a pleasure to be here.
Yes, well, wishing you every blessing. Thank you.
Thanks.